begin the work session on the Campbell Street. We'll begin with introductions, starting with Mr. Birch.
Chris Birch.
Birch.
You threw the ribbon on. I'm the first one to introduce myself last two. So.
Okay.
Patrick Floyd Assembly.
Jennifer Johnston.
Adrian Assembly. Tim Steele.
Paul Honeman.
Bernie Hall.
Amy Domboski, Assembly.
Paul Foos, I'm the project manager for the Gambell Street redevelopment project for the Fairview Business Association. With me is Bob Kniefel. Most of you probably know him. He worked in municipal transportation for many years, and he's working for Kittleson Associates now, and did a lot of the work that you're going to see here today. Also with us are some of the members of the Fairview Business Association, Lucky Wishbone, First National Bank, other members of the Anchorage Aces, Rick Morrison, Morrison Auto, and a bunch of others. So we formed this group about 1.5 years ago, and when the H2H project was called off, we thought, well, you know, we need to do something to improve Gambell Street. There was always left nothing done to it because we thought H2H was going to happen and something else. But when DOT called it off, and then the mayor said, now we're going to go out and work on some of these other connectors, 36 and the Seward Highway. Then we went to DOT and we said, look, we want to look at what we can do to improve this road within the next 10 years, and improvements which would stand no matter what happens with the other things like H2H or Cabata or whatever. So they supported us. The legislature gave us a grant of $200,000 to do the engineering, the traffic engineering and some cost estimating and some other things for the project. So we hired CH2M Hill in partnership with Kittleson, so they did the work that's before you. Part of it, you know, we want to make sure that you know this is part of an overall economic revitalization plan, and we'll be coming back to you with some other issues a little bit later. This tax abatement issue, we've been working with Lucinda Mahoney on this. The idea is, if as part of your development, you have to put in municipal infrastructure like water lines, sewer lines, electrical, that you could write that off against your property taxes until it's paid off as an incentive to develop in this area. And since we put it on the table, then the mayor said, well, maybe we should extend that to Ship Creek as well. If it works, we should probably do it for the whole city. So you're going to hear more from us on that. A parking structure and amenities at 15th and Gambell. We've been working with the Community Development Authority, the Anchorage Aces with their property, the Green Connection. Can help resolve some of the traffic issues and also create some economic development around that. Housing development, we all know the problems with housing in Anchorage. House Bill 50 passed last year allows AHFC to finance combined commercial and residential. So we're looking at some of that. Reduce the harm from public inebriates. This is something we bear a special cross on, but which affects the whole city. So we feel like it's partly our responsibility to try to come up with some solutions on that. And of course, it's eventually have to be incorporated into the Fairview Community Plan and the Anchorage Comprehensive Plan. And we do have representatives of the Community Council here today as well, and their contractor, Agnew Beck, that's working on finalizing their community plan. So if we could go to the next slide here, Bob. So when we, the partners, we've worked with a lot of people putting this together. I won't read them all to you, but you can see it's a wide range of the public and private organizations, including the Trucking Association, the Chamber, and all of these other people that have something to do with it. You know, there's one more agency, which is Public Works, because we've got drainage on Gambell, and that's an issue that we have to go through as well. And it's funny, it's kind of split ownership. The city owns part of it and the state owns part of it, so that all needs to be resolved. Hi there, Mr. City Manager.
Hi there.
Good to see you. So when we looked at Gambell, here's what we found. Now this is, these are remnants of the old building that was done there. These are telephone poles right in the middle of the sidewalk. People have to go around it or into the street to try to get around it. Next slide. ML&P has had to put in, that's a railroad rail there and a metal shroud around it, kind of a punji stick for a car to hit before it hits the telephone pole. And the part of that is if a car hits it and knocks the pole over, it's going to electrocute somebody. That's already happened. 2 people got electrocuted. So there's safety and a liability issue for the city in that. For this, what happens in the winter, it is 4 lanes, but it goes to 3 lanes in the winter, and nobody knows where the lane is. You can't tell. I mean, this violates every tenet of transportation planning safety. You want people to drive the same way on the same road every time. So it also shows some of the snow removal issues on the sidewalk. This next one shows that somewhere under here is actually the sidewalk. And then, of course, the snow bleeds out into the road here, and there's no way you can get in and pick it up because of the telephone poles. So, you know, those are some of the reasons why we think this really needs to be addressed. Now, here's the existing roadway, 60-foot right-of-way, and everything we've done has been to stay within that 60 feet right-of-way because to stay away from right-of-way acquisition issues. But you've got 4 lanes, they're different length of each other, there's no place for the snow to go, it's a very narrow sidewalk, the pedestrians are right next to it. So we went through a pretty extensive planning process with the community, with the businesses, and invited everybody to come. And what we came up with was this was the preferred alternative. It's 3 standard lanes, a little bit wider, a little bit safer, a snow storage area, and a 9-foot sidewalk. Now, we expect when there's snow, that snow will probably creep over here a little bit, but you can get in and you can get at it now and clear it out. So we did discuss, you know, shrubbery and things like that in this area, but we rejected that because it's hard to keep up, and if it gets in the way of snow removal. And so this is kind of a compromise. I mean, you know, because in a recognition, this is a major highway through Anchorage. And so one of the things that we did, we had to make sure to answer that question. If we do this, what impact is it going to have on traffic volumes, on the movement of traffic and safety? So that was the work that really was that Kittleson and CH2M Hill centered in on, and I'll just give Bob a chance now to kind of go over some of the things that they found. And I would say all of this in much more detail is in this handout if you want to go through it, all the intersection turning counts and everything else, but Bob will just give you an overview of what they found.
Sure, thanks, Paul. In the normal approach in that, Gambell currently is 4 lanes between 3rd Avenue and going up to about 15th. At 15th, the left-hand lane becomes a left turn lane that drops at Fireweed Lane. So what happens there, if you go out and watch the traffic, and especially the evening peak hour, traffic backs up from Benson, Northern Lights, Fireweed Lane, all the way back down the hill, back to the sports arena. We were lucky out there on the day we were doing some of our photography, and that it was actually backed up all the way to 15th Avenue because it's only 3 lanes south of Fireweed Lane. What we're proposing is that we looked at the past counts. Seward Highway is basically leveled off over the past few years in that. As to any growth in that, we've added some additional capacity, and the Lake Otis issues in that, the Boniface issues, some of the other operations going on have actually increased the north-south capacity in that, and they've kind of filtered out to where right now there is no growth on Gambell. In fact, just a little bit of a decline from previous averages. We do expect that to change, and we know that as additional projects such as the Cavada project was slated to tie into 3rd Avenue at Gambell, and also the highway-to-highway project, the Glen Highway to the Seward Highway project. But again, the Cavada project, you know, their whole basis was they'd have to have the Seward Highway connection placed in that. So again, we don't see any, you know, major instances coming problems with this in that. We did use projected growth rates going through the plan, trying to come up with where's the traffic going to be in the future, and can the 3 lanes handle it? And everything we've done says yes, the answer is there. We even went and looked at some adjacent streets that have currently 3 lanes and how much traffic is on those. And so as we walked through the intersections on Gambell Street, the only place we had a problem at all was at 15th, and that was needing a left-hand turn lane to handle the lot of left-hand turners southbound to eastbound going towards the mountains in that.
Bob, let me just explain this a little bit more. So you look at this level of service. This is existing C and D up to 2035. So what happens if we only did 3 lanes all the way along, we would see an actual reduction in the efficiency of the road. But when you put a left turn lane, the issue is 15th and Gambell. When you put that in, we're at exactly the same service level up to 2035 as we are right now. And as Bob said, the traffic problem isn't along this stretch. It's when you get up to Benson and Northern Lights. That's where the real backup is. And they took data for 2 weeks, the most recent traffic data on this, and all the turning radiuses and everything, and even modeled an event at the Sullivan Arena, which had never been done before. They modeled a graduation event there, and it's really a mess. You all know that. And so one of the recommendations of this study, it goes beyond the scope of this, is it really needs a traffic management plan, and someone really needs to grab a hold of that. This Chester Creek Sports Complex, USKH group is addressing some of it, but I just did want to flag that as we look through all of these, that was an issue during an event at the Sullivan Arena.
Yeah, again, one of the issues is if we look at, again, the adjacent streets that have similar lane configurations, Fifth Avenue, Sixth Avenue, C Street, are all 3-lane facilities and handle substantially more than what's being handled on Gambell now. So again, we felt pretty comfortable looking at that as a recommendation. And one of the real issues here is the safety side of the viewpoint. I mean, pedestrians are really in tough shape. The 6 months out of the year when we have the snow problems and that. They're having to be out in the streets. We talked to many people on that, even the people with wheelchairs have to go out in the street to get around the poles or get around the snow issues and that. So in addition to, we think, not having a major impact on the capacity side, we do see some major improvements. We're getting pedestrian safety, and also which impacts the businesses along there. Right now, you're very narrow sidewalks. There's not a lot of room to do anything there. And when we come up with, instead of 6-foot sidewalks, we now have 9-foot sidewalks. We're also then allowing additional area on the street for snow storage. DOT is very interested in that because, again, they typically don't pick and go. They plow the snow to the side. That's where we're getting our issues. So much wider sidewalks and a snow storage area on the adjacent shoulder of the street, and that really has some great impacts on what's going to be happening there.
So these are the next steps, and I'd like to refer you in this is a letter. It says State of Alaska at the top. This is from Ken Morton from DOT, and he really lays out the roadmap for what we need to do to take the projects to the next step. And this number one is obtain municipal support for the concept and related studies. And that's what we're going to be asking you to do as an assembly, is to endorse the concept. And we know there's a lot more refinement of this that's going to need to take place, and DOT has really laid this out in the letter. We've met with municipal transportation planning. They're going to want to look at some things, but what happens is if we just get an endorsement of this, then DOT can actually adopt the project, start looking at it, and actually laying it out. And one of the things that we are trying to do is match up with the repaving of Gambell in 2015. They've got it slated for a major repaving. And if we can do that, it's better to do it at once. It's better cost-wise, contracting-wise, and it's much less of a disruption. And everybody hates it when we go in and we build something and the next year we have to go dig it back up again. So we're trying to coordinate with that. Our other projections that are asked for in this letter by DOT about what if Kabata happens or doesn't happen, H2H, all of those things, that's what, in addressing these issues, and also what is the cost of undergrounding. When we met with ML&P, Jim Posey was really clear. They don't have all the money to do this. They've got an undergrounding fund, but we're going to have to get in and define those costs and probably go to the legislature if we want to see that happen. The issue of the storm drains, we don't know what condition they're in. They're 60 years old. Some are owned by the municipalities, some by the state. We need to look at that. Can we modify the existing ones, or do we need to redo it? Going to the communications companies for undergrounding those utilities. So that's what we're going to spend the money on that you appropriated for us, is fulfilling the requirements of everybody to make sure this is sound before we move forward. And they've laid out a clear map for us here. And then eventually we'll take it into the community plan. Like I said, Agnew Beck here is working with the community council on getting their plan to the point that it can be brought to you in planning and zoning. And then eventually, adoption of the plan into the comprehensive plan, so that, we will be consistent with zoning and everything else when we go to do some of these redevelopment projects. And the last slide is just kind of a visualization of more what Gambell would look like. It's 3 lanes, snow removal, wider sidewalks. That's just an architectural concrete. But moving the street lights out to the back, undergrounding the utilities. The other thing that I often think of driving in here, this street is one of the first things that people see when they come into Anchorage. For thousands of people a day. it doesn't really, the way it looks right now, it's not so great. So I think overall, we're kind of approaching our centennial here. If we clean up Gamble Street, it's gonna really help the overall look and feel of the city as a whole. And then I want to give S.J. Klein, he's the president of the community council, just a minute to address you and to tell you what their part has been in this.
Thanks, Paul. And first off, I'd like to say thank you, everybody, for first for the appropriation for this project, and second for the opportunity to come and talk to you about not just about what we're planning to do in Gamble, but in Fairview in total. The neighborhood's been working for almost 15 years on a neighborhood plan. We're finally at the point where we're finalizing it, I guess, for lack of a better word. We've hired Agnew Beck to work with us to kind of refine what the community has worked on for a long time, and get it into a format that sort of can get through the city planning process, and also that we're comfortable bringing to the assembly for approval. The neighborhood plan includes kind of looking at the Gamble-Ingrid corridor, which right now has almost 5 full city blocks that are vacant. It's an economic dead zone, in part because the question with highway to highway, a lot of people didn't want a development in an area where they didn't know if there was going to be if their land was going to be taken over by DOT. And while that's not resolved yet, this specific plan kind of fits into the larger question of what do we do with this corridor. The vision in our plan is to make that Ingrid-Gamble corridor a more high density, high commercial use area, but also have higher density housing in there as well. And this plan the Gamble Street redevelopment really fits with that. It also fits both safety issues that we've identified, and kind of making the neighborhood more walkable. It's accommodating, 30,000 cars, 25,000 cars that come through every day, but at the same time, right now, if you go down Gamble Street in the winter, there are people walking on that same federal interstate. So the snow removal issues are a huge part of this thing. Basically, the business association came to the community council with the concept, or I guess we developed it together. We worked very closely with USKH and with Kittleson in developing the concept that we're bringing to you. Every step of the process has been vetted with members of the council and the public. They developed it with our input and with our contractors' input. They've involved both members of the community and our contractor in every level of communication and putting the plan together. And the community council has endorsed the redevelopment project that's before you. So, and then also there's I believe 10% of the budget that you've appropriated is intended for the community council to use with our contractor to kind of make sure that the neighborhood plan kind of fits what fits the redevelopment portion, and that we're able to kind of get it through the whole regulatory process as well.
So that's it. I hope we left enough time for questions.
I've got some people in the queue here, starting with Mr. Holman, Mr. Bastian, and Ms. Johnston. Mr. Holman.
First of all, thank you for all the collaboration that everybody's put together, both the private business ownership, residential with the community council, and all the stakeholders in place. Mr. Knie, I mean, there's several people that have lots of history that know what they're talking about and what we want as a community in that part of the community, as businesses, as residents, and clearly as people that have information on the transportation portion. I've never seen a plan, in my opinion, that screams government cooperation at every level than this one. And frankly, as a practitioner working those roads for years and having scraped the car trying to pull off of a side street onto Gamble and hitting a snow berm that had worked its way out, as you call, it's phenomenal that more people haven't been injured with those utility poles still sitting in the middle of the sidewalk. So I looked at the layout plan, and I'd like to make sure that we do everything we can to support, at least get us to the point where, I mean, I've heard it said once, starting from yes, and then let's work our way to no. I mean, we do what we can, and then if we can't do something, then that's the answer. But we say yes until we get to no, and I'd like to see this move as a body. Thank you.
Ms. Dembowski.
I have just a couple of questions, thank you, Mr. Chairman. What is the standard, I was seeing 9-foot sidewalks, and I just was curious, what is the standard for usually sidewalk width?
Well, it's all over the map. You know, you'll see everything from 4 feet out to 10 or 12 feet. Now, we've got about 3 or 4 different sidewalk lengths on 9th Avenue. By the way, that project turned out great.
Beautiful.
That's kind of what I was thinking
Use that
of,
as
is
well.
that look. But I think if you see along a main road, as you drive out Merrill Field and you look at that sidewalk on the side there, there's enough for people to walk on that, although that's a heavily traveled, and that's a 9-foot sidewalk. It's actually enough bicycles and people both use it. So I think that'd be the best example of what you'd look at as kind of a standard for a sidewalk next to a busy interstate highway.
My second question, and I actually had it in my mind, and then you started talking about it, but one of the things that I'm looking for is, I'm not looking for the government to do something, and I like the fact that you're communicating, but I would like a clear definition of what projects maybe MLMP, AWW, anybody else in this area might have. Because I'm not into you guys, us advocating and spending a lot of money in this area, and then 3 years later, having to rip up part of it to do it again. And so if there's not a clear definition and all these stakeholders aren't at the table, it'll be challenging for me to represent my taxpayers and make sure we have a good long-range plan. So that's something that I'm going to be looking for. So I hope, it sounds like you're already on that path.
I have to agree with you 100%, and that's what we really need to do, is define these costs, other projects, how do we coordinate them? So we've met with them all, but the sequence is that first DOT has to say, here's how we're gonna do the sidewalk, here's how we're gonna do the drains. If we're gonna leave room for a utilidor, here's how we're gonna do it. And then MLMP comes in and says, okay, here's how we're gonna lay our lines in there. But we thought we'd be starting with MLMP first, but they said no. We met with everybody, the correct coordination, the DOT, then MLMP. So we've got that all lined out.
And that's fine, as long as, you know, we have a full comprehensive plan. And to me, part of that comprehensive plan is to identify each person or each entity that might possibly be doing something, what it is they'll be doing, and their commitment to
Right.
coordinate. Because it's not good government to redo things 3 years later. And I had one last question, if I may. SJ, you were just saying there's community council involvement. Can you tell me how active is your community council? How many people usually show up at your meetings?
Between 20 and 30 members show up at our meetings. In the process of developing this neighborhood plan, I mean, we've had, I believe, 6 public meetings over 10 years. The most recently, we took input at our Fairview Block Party, and then before that, we also had an open house. So, and input from just those 2 events was, I believe, at least 60 different.
Yeah, I want to say at the block party, we probably interacted with at least 75 to 100 people. I would say just coming by the booth, looking at what was happening, getting a little update, commenting. We had an interactive kind of display with somebody on stilts. It was real engaging. And then we also had an opportunity there for people to do a survey, an online survey about the plan goals. And so at the site, only maybe 3 people filled out the survey, I want to say, just because it was a little time consuming.
How many survey respondents?
But we had 38 survey respondents total, which, working in consulting, I gotta say, that's actually pretty darn good. I mean, I know it sounds like a small number, but that means 38 people like found the website, logged on, sat there, did and completed the survey. So, and that was responding specifically related to the neighborhood plan.
And then also at the when Kittleson came up and had work sessions, I mean, we must have had, how many members of the public came to those sessions over the course of the 3 days? I believe we had, I would guess at least 50 people showed up over the course of 3 days.
That's valuable to me, because sometimes you get community council resolutions, there's 5 people.
Mhm.
So when, you know, the different aspects that you share, that's valuable. Thank you.
Ms. Johnston?
Could you please identify yourself for the record?
Oh, yeah, my name's Tanya Iden, and I work for Agnew Beckett Consulting.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if this is a question for you or Mr. Michaelis, but the money that we appropriated, how is that being managed? Are your contractors billing the municipality and we just pay it?
I can answer that question, and I met with Deborah Fitzgerald. She's a grants administrator, and it'll be managed in the same way that we did the state grant that we had. And we'll lay it out. What happens is that we lay out the work. We have to supply an invoice and show the work that was done. We get reimbursed after the work is done. We don't get the money in advance, so we have to show that we are staying within the scope of the work. And we're really using this DOT document as the guiding document because they're telling us exactly what needs to be done, the additional work that was outside of the scope of our original project. So that's how it is. And then we have to make a report, and then we will be reimbursed after that.
So do you see most of the funding that was appropriated going to your
Primarily to the contractor, yes, because these are some technical issues. There is some of us actually managing the project and getting people in the same room. You know, that's part of what we've done, is pulled everybody together and with all the interest groups that we had to do. There's still more of that needs to be done.
And is the business association doing that as their volunteer and their community aspect, or are you gonna receive payment for that?
We are receiving payment for that, for actually managing the project, just like we did with the state. And I can provide you with all those state documents and everything that we did in a work plan. It takes a lot to put something like this together. It just won't happen unless you get somebody, you know, pulling the, you know, same people in the room together to make it happen.
Assembly committee.
Yeah, sort of, whatever.
Okay, Mr. Flynn, and then I'm gonna let Mr. Birch back clean up, and we'll wrap it up here in a few minutes.
And you, Amy, I think you got most of the answers you wanted, but I'll tell you, as a community council veteran, we know our community councils sort of wax and wane depending on what's going on in the neighborhood. But Fairview has been consistently one of the more active in Anchorage, and certainly in my neighborhoods. And it's nice to see that you guys have done a good job of drawing in the business association, so it's not just neighbors who have an axe to grind, it's people who want to make the whole neighborhood work. Question I had, Paul, you had on your slide, that at some point you're going to be coming to us for an endorsement of the project, and do you have a rough idea of the time frame on that?
Well, the sooner the better, then DOT can go ahead and get going on this. So if you could even do it as a motion, as the assembly is sufficient to say we're endorsing this, do a resolution, or something like that, to say we're endorsing the concept, and that's what we're saying. We all know there's a lot of details that have to go into it, but if you endorse the concept, then everybody else can do the rest of their project.
Thank you.
Mr. Birch.
I was just gonna say a great brief. I guess the one aspect that I did note in the DOT letter is very concerned about traffic growth, you know, approaching 30,000 vehicles a day without the Seward-Glen Highway. And I guess, you know, having had some experience in Arctic, you know, and there's, and with the businesses and stuff, and just, you know, basically the bottom line, you know, moving traffic through there. Where are we at with that, with the DOT as far as the traffic projections? Is that?
Well, what we did is, in our assumption, and we went through this with them, we were assuming 0.5% a year growth. Although that's pretty ambitious given the chart. And what's happened, the work that you've done on at Elmore Street, and some of those the stuff out east has really helped, you know, some of the congestion, moving that traffic out. So we think that's even an ambitious at 0.5%. And you know, they both connect to 3-lane highway. So unless we're going to rip out all the businesses along Merrill Field too, and to try to get to 4 lanes there, what do you really get? At some point, you gotta come up with a real solution. You know, we don't know what that is, and highway to highway's been put off. But you know, if Cabada came in with an extra 30,000 people, 4 lanes would never handle that. And I can tell you that to try to put a 5 or 6 lane freeway through Fairview with fences around it, that's not going to happen. I mean, so what's the alternative? Somebody has to come up with something. Well, this is good to 2035, though. That's good for the next 20 years.
Good work. Thank you.
Very good. Gentlemen, thank you for the presentation. We're going to adjourn. We'll reconvene in 5 minutes.